Hello, everyone. This is an intimidating room. Talia, I don't know how you were so poised on the first day. Hi, I'm Matthew McCown. I'm from Conservation Metrics. And we are a small consulting firm in the United States. We're a for-profit in the conservation space. We're mission-driven. And our goal is to help improve the health of the planet through better monitoring. And we were some of the pioneers in using machine learning for bioacoustics. We've done projects across the globe with many different partners, and we recently realized we've listened to 27,000 different places on the planet, at least. And the approach that we take is we try to leverage technology to help provide better information for decision makers. So during the adaptive management process, there are a lot of different decisions where managers need to have ecological information, and we're trying to leverage technologies that can improve the information that is provided to those managers. And we have two different programs in the organization. One is this conservation outcomes program, and we've recently started what we call an indigenous guardianship program. I'm happy to talk to you about that, but today I'm going to be focusing on the conservation outcomes side of our work. On that side of the work, the kinds of things that we typically end up doing for customers is helping folks look for rare and endangered species, working with government agencies and others to track resources through time and trends and sort of ecosystem health. We do a lot of before-after studies, so we work closely with a group called Island Conservation, where we measure before and after eradications on islands and what happens to species. And we do some work with impact assessment with wildlife and the built environment, and then some biosecurity work. And we do this work mostly with bioacoustics, but with other things too, camera traps, drone data, satellite data, et cetera. But this is the main set of work that we do. And my background is as a seabird ecologist, and when we founded the company, we were really trying to help people who had the same problems I did during my PhD, which is how do you find these really rare species that breed on oceanic islands, only return to their colonies at night, and nest underground. They're really difficult to monitor, but it turns out you can spy on them. And so that was the genesis for our work. Our original work, we grew pretty rapidly within our network of seabird folks. A lot of these seabirds are endangered. So we started to help people find species that were thought to be extinct, species that no one knew where they were breeding, and finding new breeding sites for endangered species. And so that was the beginning of our work. Since then, we have expanded to all kinds of taxa. But the other thing that we've started to do is the kind of the long-term monitoring work. This is a graph showing on the y-axis, you have kind of an average amount of activity, call rates for species. This is a Hawaiian petrel, an endangered species in Hawaii. And on the y-axis is years. We're just starting the 15th year of this work, I think. And this is monitoring at conservation action sites. These are sites, breeding sites on the island of Kauai, where our partners are getting rid of cats, rats, putting up fences, otherwise improving the habitat. And this is the use of these acoustic metrics. It's a simple metric of the success or outcomes of your conservation effort. Is that project working? Well, yeah, you're seeing a huge increase in the number of birds that are coming back to the colony every season and calling. Today I'll be talking, that's sort of the background, and today I'll be talking about work that we started speaking about in 2020 with Aaron Rice from Cornell Lab of Ornithology about could we apply these same methods to marine systems? Could we use this to evaluate the health of coral reef systems and to help measure outcomes in coral reef restoration projects? And we were driven by a growing body of evidence that a lot of different taxa are making decisions in marine spaces based on sound. So there's evidence that multiple kinds of larval forms of different taxa are using sound fields to decide where to recruit. There's evidence that healthy reefs have more fish calling activity than degraded reefs. There's also evidence that's similar, that's like there's more kinds of different calls, different types of calls on healthy reefs and restored reefs than degraded reefs. So this was kind of our evidence that there might be something interesting about listening to reefs. And so we started work then. And we're really hoping to sort of leverage the advantages of bioacoustics that bioacoustics brings in a terrestrial realm and use those underwater. And the main advantages of these approaches is you can vastly increase the temporal and spatial scale of monitoring efforts. Like you can put many different sensors out that are monitoring concurrently over very long periods of time. And that really helps to increase your statistical power to detect really small trends in complicated places. That's also archivable. So as all of our technology gets better, you can go back and hit your acoustic data again, disregarding the ethical issues of data centers. But the data is archivable, so you can go and look and ask new questions of these data, which is really important. The approaches to doing this in one reef system and then trying it again at a different reef system around a different part of the world, you can make this a standardized approach. You can really work to compare apples to apples across different projects. It's less invasive and it can be less costly, although startup costs are not trivial, and costs are a long-term problem. So in 2020, we were working with Aaron and then started working with a number of other collaborators. We have been initiating studies around the world, in Moorea in French Polynesia, in the Hawaiian Islands with a variety of different people across the Hawaiian archipelago, and in a place called Palmyra Atoll where we have previously worked on seabird projects and we started to work underwater. And I'm going to present some preliminary results from these things. And I'm going to emphasize, we're really at early stages of this. And so there's a lot, for those of you who are entering this field or just interested in this, there's a lot of research that needs to be done. There's a lot of work and there's a lot of room for collaboration, and we're very interested in that. Just quick thing for those new to passive acoustics, there are a number of different underwater sensors, hydrophones they're called. We have been using sound traps, which are about $5,000 a piece, and then hydromoths, which are about $180 a piece. And we've been testing the two, and all the data I'm presenting today will be from either of these. We've started to move largely to hydromoths. Okay, on your right are spectrograms. So those of you who don't know about spectrograms, this is a representation of sound. On the y-axis you have time, on the x-axis you have frequency, and then how loud a thing is the intensity of the colors at those frequencies. And so we have spent a ton of time labeling and identifying and annotating sounds from these locations. And although we know what the source of some of these sounds, most of the sounds we're annotating, we have no idea who is producing the sound. So it's a whole area of research that I'd love to talk to folks about. So we have a lot of really odd classes that just have general names. But we have been spending a lot of time. We have a machine learning model that has 117 different sound classes in it at the moment. And we've labeled 150,000 different labeled windows. I'm not going to play these sounds. They're very low frequency and quiet, but come up to me afterwards and we can listen to them on my computer. So after we built our model, we wanted to sort of just stress test it. Is this model recovering sort of meaningful ecological information? And this is another kind of graph you'll see a number of different examples of, where on the y-axis you have day of year. On the x-axis you have day of year. On the y-axis you have time of day. And then the color again is the intensity of the activity. How many times we're detecting that signal in that time and that day. And what we see here is you have a lot of parrotfish grazing across the sites. This is combining all the sites in a lagoon in Moorea. You have tons of parrotfish grazing across the lagoon. And it is nicely bounded between a sunset time and a sunrise time. And we know that parrotfish are diurnally active and they sleep at night. So yes, our model is recovering meaningful ecological data. It seems like it's working at that level. We also see signals that have the completely opposite kinds of behaviors. This is an unknown, a fish knock of an unknown species, or set of species maybe, that are nocturnal. So they are calling after sunset and before sunrise. And then we have damselfish. And here you see a really interesting pattern in the lagoon where you have calling on nights when there's a new moon. So it's on the darkest, as it's getting darker, the damselfish are chorusing. And this is something that's been shown previously that damselfish and a number of other fish spawn on a monthly basis. And so these are spawning events that are occurring, and you can detect those throughout the year with this model. So it seems our model is recovering interesting data, and we're excited about that and excited to move forward. So how do you apply this to questions? And again, bear with me that these are preliminary results. These are pilot projects. They're not science paper publications, but I'm trying to show some of the interesting trends. One of the first places we started to work was in Palmyra Atoll in the Line Islands, and the US Army during World War II built a bunch of airstrips and causeways across the lagoon of this atoll and completely changed the hydrology, making it an anoxic lagoon. In the last few years, storms have started to breach across the atoll, and we're restoring hydrology of this zone. So we worked with the Nature Conservancy, who was looking at a number of sites in the lagoon to study coral recovery, and we put some acoustic sensors at 3 sites. And at the top, you could see, again, one of these activity patterns at a site where there had been just a recent breach, so it's like still like an anoxic lagoon. A site that's next to an older breach, so where there's been a year or 2 of restoration of water quality, and then a normal healthy reef is the bottom one. And you can see there's a gradient there from no activity to lots of activity, especially at night, where you're starting to see some recovery. So again, not a statistically significant result here, but like starting to show the ways that you can, what kinds of questions you might be able to ask and address with this technology. We've also been looking at bleaching events on Moorea and on Palmyra, and we see, again, that you see trends. The red line divides before and after a bleaching event, and you start to see declines in certain signals before and after bleaching events in certain reef habitats. Some of the reef habitats behave differently, and this is a trend we'll see later in the data. We've also applied this in Florida for some fisheries questions, where they had been deploying acoustic sensors for years, but were not able to process the data. And so we started looking at the calls of black grouper, which is a species of fisheries interest, but also is threatened or in trouble. And the state of Florida has a number of different sites where they do different fisheries regulations. And they have been acoustically monitoring those sites across the Florida Cays. And what you see here is, again, because of the differences of the sampling effort, we don't just have 1 bar per fisheries regulation type, but you see a general trend if you squint your eyes where there's a no-take zone, where if there's no fishing allowed, is where you have the highest activity rates, and intermediate at a place where you do seasonal closures to protect the fish when they're breeding, and the lowest activity rates are at the sites that have no protection. On Moorea, we've been working with a group from UC Santa Barbara, and this is an effort to try and compare acoustics to traditional monitoring techniques using diving, eDNA, and acoustics. And we've been working at 3 different reef zones at long-term ecological research sites on the island that have been monitored for 20 years. We just started doing this work a few years ago. Here we're able to have, sort of better replication in our data, and start to see that these different signals are different at different parts of the reef. So it's going to be very important to be understanding where you are on the reef and what you might expect with some of these signals. And some of these signals may be operating in different ways on the fore reef, which is out on the far edge of the reef, in the back reef, which is just behind where the waves are breaking, and then the fringing reef, which is just around the island. And so we see significant differences across many different kinds sound classes in activity patterns in these different sites. And we're just right now going through trying to make the comparisons across eDNA, traditional survey techniques, and acoustics. And we're really trying to understand and grapple with how to deal with these lines of observation that operate at very different temporal and spatial scales. And so how is it that you compare and contrast, and what can you learn when you combine all of these kinds of lines of observation? Here's just an example of some of the complexity there. This is the traditional count of number of damselfish that you have in a transect versus our acoustic metrics of activity. And you see that they're only correlated in one of these reef zones in the back reef. Finally, we looked at some work at a coral restoration site. And this is a graph that's showing the difference between a control site and a new outplanting site. And you can see here that parrotfish grazing was very different when we started the project, but through time, the two sites flipped. So you started to get a lot more parrotfish grazing at the new restored coral reef sites. So just another way to be looking at using these metrics and trying to find which species and which signals really are things that you should be tracking through time. Finally, related to the previous panel conversation as well, while we were doing this work, we heard from the community that they were concerned that we were doing acoustic monitoring around the lagoon of Moorea because there were a number of sacred sites and a number of things that were private. And so we stood up a dashboard to show exactly where we were recording, what kinds of things we were finding, and then we have tabs on there to ask community members if they know what some of the fish are that we can't identify. And so this just started, and we're starting that conversation that'll be continuing through the next couple of years with the community. But I think the community involvement is really important in this work. Finally, we're doing some work with, we're starting to work with the US government in US national marine sanctuaries across the Pacific, trying to help them analyze very large amounts of acoustic data that they've been collecting but have not been processing. And so we are setting up metrics, acoustic metrics, to track change and health of these marine sanctuaries. And this is an example of humpback whales arriving in the Hawaiian Islands in winter. Some of the challenges, again, we don't know the species identification, so that's a place we'd really love to collaborate. There's a group called the Fisheye Collective that has a camera that can help identify which fish are making sounds, so that's something we're interested in working with. But anyone who's working on this problem or has some thoughts would love to talk about that. Another problem in the ML, in the machine learning space, is when we go to a new reef system, it's really hard for us to find all the different kinds of sounds that are in that new community. And so we'd really love to collaborate to explore how it is that we can use machine learning to show us examples of all the different kinds of things that are in this space. Not necessarily all the things that are similar to things we've found before. So that's a machine learning problem we're interested in. We also are interested in increasing the scale of these pilot work to be able to say things more quantitatively and to be monitoring across clear contrasts, healthy reefs, restored reefs, degraded reefs, with lots of replicates so that we can really start to understand which of these signals track those known differences. And we'd love to talk to you if you are working in a marine system and are interested in collaborating. And I just want to thank all of the folks we've been working with and our anonymous funder for all of this work. And we have a lot of time for questions.
Yeah, great talk. Really enjoyed it. I'm using acoustics in the marine world, so. Question about did you place the recorders in the reefs at in vertical at different heights?
We did not. We put them all affixed near the ground.
Oh.
And so that's going to affect the acoustics in some way. And, but yes, they're all deployed in the same way, but they're deployed near the ground in most of these sites. In some of the sites, we have an anchor at the bottom, a 2-meter rope, the sensor, and then another rope with a buoy that's not on the surface, like a subsurface buoy. But a lot of the places we're working have really severe currents and things that make that difficult.
Okay.
Thank you. Fantastic talk, Matthew. Thanks so much. Jake from Blue Marine Foundation. I'm really interested in the grouper work you are doing. We do some similar work in the Maldives, and we've thought about using passive acoustic monitoring to try and understand spawning aggregations, sort of multi-species spawning aggregations. So I'd really interested to know a little bit more about kind of the metrics you were looking at. And one thing that we have been thinking about doing for a while is try and get some kind of quantification of these sites through acoustics. Now, I don't know whether that's possible, but yeah, it'd be really great to get your thoughts on that.
I'd love to talk to you about it, and just to respond, we really think this is quite a powerful tool in the beginning, just to check whether historic sites, historic breeding sites, or looking at bathymetry and saying, okay, we predict this is probably a spawning site. You could just drop a sensor there for 2-3 months, and you could tell whether there's spawning aggregations or not. Again, most of these grouper, or most of these spawning things, are driven by lunar cycles. It's really weird. Some are full moon, some are new moon, and within species, different populations can have different strategies. But you put it out over several lunar cycles in a location, and you'll be able to tell whether or not fish are returning to that site. The second thing that I think would be more interesting, or a secondary thing to do, would be start to compare the intensity of acoustic activity to numbers, abundance estimates, biomass. And so that's something we'd be really interested in collaborating with too. In terrestrial realms, we have shown that there's direct correlations between activity rates and numbers of animals for certain kinds of things, and that is particularly for aggregating, things that aggregate. That metric, we tend to have really tight correlations between activity rates and numbers, abundance in some level. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you about it. And it is, so the challenge would be creating a model that recognizes the species in the Maldives. That wouldn't be hard if you know where they are. And then after that, it's a pretty cheap way to go around and monitor presence and distribution, and then monitor whether they're there. And you could start to use it to do fisheries planning.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. Super interesting. I'm curious whether you ever came across the application of bioacoustics for the deep sea, talking about hundreds to thousands of meters.
No, we haven't, but I would love to look at that. The problem will be pressurizing the hydrophone. So the hydrophones we were using, the more expensive ones can go deeper, but not the bottom of the ocean, and the hydromoths can go to like 20 meters or something, so they're not your thing. But we'd be really interested in it, and we were in a marine protected areas workshop on Tuesday, and there was a gentleman from the Dominican Republic who was part of their environmental department and government, and he was really interested in the deep waters. And I'd be really interested in exploring that problem. It's probably quite silent in most places, but I bet you, again, bathymetry-wise, you'll find places where there's going to be aggregations of things. So I'd love to talk to you about that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Some more calls, yeah.
Hello, I'm Aoife from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and right now we're working on acoustics in freshwater. So I'm going to come and talk to you afterwards, hopefully. We're trying to create some classifiers. I wanted to hear what you're doing about background noise and how you're dealing with that.
We're learning through it. And so that's basically one of the challenges here. A lot of these reef systems have very loud pistol shrimp. So you have very broadband noise fields, and that humpback whale, the humpback whale graph I showed, when the humpback whale's in Hawaii, you can't hear anything else, really. And so there's a number of different things. There's masking noise, and you can't really deal, like, if you're masked, you're masked. And so then you need to figure out periods of the day when you may have some channels. And if the species are communicating acoustically, they must have a way of operating and a time window or a distance window in which their signal is effective. So you have a chance of doing it, but you just may need to play around. Insects are going to be super cool. Invertebrates are going to be super cool in your systems. Love to talk to you. We've been talking to a number of people working in Oxbow Lakes and the Amazon is another place that might be really interesting to look. So I'm really happy to talk afterwards. Please look it up.
Perfect, thank you.
Hi, my name is Dana. I'm from a terrestrial bird organization with a fair amount of experience in bioacoustics in the terrestrial environment and also longtime reef diver. Thinking in the context of a lot of what we've talked about at this conference about matters of scale, I'm just sort of wondering about your operations. Like you mentioned a number of partners and analyzing data for other people's projects, but in terms of conservation metrics, like how many people do you have working in your department on this? What does it look like to deploy these monitors at some of your own project sites?
So yeah, so we are a consulting group again, so we don't do our own conservation work. So we're always working with others in the conservation space. In terms of scale, we're 15 people at the company, and there's 6.5 at the moment that are in the biodiversity team. And we have developed over the years a very robust infrastructure for processing very large data sets. We have projects that collect 44 years worth of acoustic data in a summer, like in a season, with a combination of all. And so scaling the acoustic processing is not a problem for us. I think the challenges in this space still remain that deploying the equipment and maintaining the equipment and then sending the data back and forth is still really something that is difficult from really remote locations. So I think that's the thing that we really would love more help on, reducing the costs and demand for that work. But the scale of projects is no longer, the scale of the actual acoustic project is no longer a real, it actually makes it cheaper per widget to do it, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for attending. I was a last minute thing. I think someone couldn't attend, so then I was asked to give this talk, and I'm really thankful that you all came, and I'm really thankful to be at this conference. It's been really interesting to meet all of these folks working on the same challenges. Please come talk to me. My colleague Abram is also here. Reach out. Would love to talk. Would love to learn. So thanks so much.